Calvin Case was on his way to Europe. He called his sister and asked her to watch his pet cat while he was gone. Calvin loved his pet cat. His sister said, "Sure, Calvin, I'll watch your cat." Calvin went to Europe. As soon as he got there, he called his sister. He said, Sister, how is my pet cat?" She said, "The cat's dead." He said, "Oh my God." He hung up the phone. It took him 2 days to recover. 2 days later, he called back and said, "Sister, don't you know I have feelings too? Don't you know you were too negative? Don't you know you should have broken the news to me much easier? The first time when I called, you could have said, 'The cat's up on the roof and we can't get it down.' Now that I would have understood. The next time when I called, you could have said, 'The cat's up in a tree, but the police and fire department are here and we're trying to get it down.' Now that I would have understood. And the third time when I called, you could have said, 'Well, the cat ran away from all the noise and confusion, and we don't expect to see it again.' Now that I would have understood." And Calvin's sister said, "Calvin, you're right. I'm sorry. I didn't think. I was too negative. I wasn't positive. Forgive me." Calvin said, "It's all right. It's over. It's done. It's through. How's Mom?" "She's on the roof." We frequently encounter negative influences, even from those people who least desire to be a negative influence. Much like a computer, we are programmed every day. Some of the input we receive is positive, but most of the input we receive is negative. It is not that we are computers and simply collect and regurgitate data, but the evidence does indicate that our minds do work in at least a similar fashion. In the last cassette, we discussed the importance of maintaining a rational mental process by which we sustain the vivid image of our goals. In other words, we discussed the need for programming ourselves on a daily basis with input that will help us reach our goals, and the need for attempting to avoid input that will pull us down and deter us from the accomplishment of those goals. This cassette is devoted to exploring the techniques available for programming that computer and maintaining that conscious mental process which is so necessary for success. It is, to a very large extent, us against the world. The images, thoughts, and attitudes that our mind can conjure and feed into itself versus the negative input so readily available around us and so eager to make its way into our subconscious mind. Here we'll explore the use of logic, our Einstein mode, to affect our attitudes, Carnegie mode, which in turn will ultimately reach and exert some control over our emotions, the Garland mode. Logic is the key. Conscious thought is the control knob. Please complete the following sentences if you can. Pepsi-Cola hits the call for Ivory soap is. Were you able to complete each sentence? Probably so. Now here's the bad news. None of those commercials have been on TV for 15 years. Why do we still remember them? Why will we take those slogans to the grave with us? Surely, when you first heard those commercials, you didn't make a deliberate attempt to memorize them. When the commercials came on TV, you didn't say, "By God, I'm going to learn this." In fact, you did just the opposite. You probably got up from your easy chair and went into the kitchen for a snack. But the sound followed you throughout the house and it sunk in. It was repeated to you over and over and over again until eventually it seeped into your subconscious and became a permanent part of you. You've been programmed, like it or not. Thousands of times each week we are exposed to slogans and advertisements until the information the sponsor wants us to remember becomes permanently embellished on our mental tapes. Just like a computer, we've been programmed. The technique used to accomplish this purpose is called spaced repetition. We'll be exploring that concept in more detail in a moment. We've all met the deep thinker who worries about everything. He even worries about why he worries. He wears depression like a badge that says, "Look, I'm obviously intelligent. I know so much about the world around me that I'm worried stiff." That individual, and others like him, exists on a mental diet of concern and consternation. They take great pleasure in worrying about the things over which they have absolutely no control. They frequently use that process as an excuse not to worry about the things over which they do have control. It's the "what difference does it make anyway? Russia's bound to attack China any day now" syndrome. There are other mental diets available as well. The housewife who gets to spend all day conversing with 2-year-old children while ironing her husband's socks and watching soap operas exists on a mental diet of monosyllabic words, stained diapers, and John Loves Mary dialogue. Is it any wonder that this type of audience becomes so emotionally involved in daytime programming when it is the only thing in their world which even closely approximates adult living? The business executive who spends all day receiving and processing input relative to business can develop a balance sheet mentality devoid of any emotional considerations or social concern. It's all a product of mental diet. Just as there is much truth to the adage that we are physically what we eat, so it is true that we are mentally what we permit our minds to consume. Just as the teenager who exists on a garbage dump diet of cheeseburgers, french fries, and soft drinks can be helped physically by a lean cut of prime rib and some salad, so too can those of us who exist on a diet of garbage dump thinking composed of negative and demeaning thoughts be helped mentally by an occasional dose of the good, the pure, and the positive. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. Just as the rest of the world is not going to supply you with food for your physical diet, neither will it spoon-feed you the positive or fulfilling thoughts which must be a part of your mental diet. Just as we must furnish our own food for the table, so too must we furnish our own thoughts for our minds. But we can't go to the store and buy, say, a motivating meatloaf or positive pumpernickel. We must manufacture that mind food ourselves. But we possess the capability to do just that. You may wonder why so many self-help programs spend so much time discussing the importance of goals, as we did in the preceding cassette. The reason is that goals seem to generate all the qualities necessary for their accomplishment. Goals are the energy source that we utilize to manufacture the motivating and positive thoughts our mental diet requires. We've all seen many examples of how goals tend to generate first the thoughts and then the qualities necessary for their accomplishment. You can perhaps think of such an example within your own family. For example, I have a brother who is a medical doctor, a cancer specialist. And if you had met Pete 20 years ago, you'd have said, that boy's going to become a doctor. Many children make up their minds, as my brother Pete did, at a very early age, exactly what it is they are going to become. Long before they ultimately reach their goal, they manifest the qualities characteristic to the status to which they aspire. Peter acted and talked and thought like a doctor when he was 14. His ultimate attainment of that goal was a foregone conclusion. In the interim, that driving desire generated all the other qualities necessary for its accomplishment. The attitudes were there, the logic was there, the emotions were there. Peter didn't become a doctor when he graduated from medical school. He became a doctor at about age 14 when he saw a film on childbirth, came home, and announced simply, "I know what I want to do." Children provide the clearest example of this phenomenon, namely because they are generally too dumb to know how tough it's going to be. Conversely, adults establish goals and spend a good portion of their time thereafter talking themselves out of the desired end result. Yet, despite the tendency of adults to take a more realistic view, The clear establishment of goals in which we genuinely believe at the adult level is especially important to the process of generating the thoughts and attitudes that will help us achieve those final destinations. The effect is circular. On the one hand, a goal will help us generate the thoughts, hopes, and aspirations necessary for its accomplishment. But on the other hand, we cannot expect our goals to be constantly self-fulfilling and self-supporting. We must constantly search for additional positive input to help us sustain that goal. The most useful device available is known as spaced repetition. The commercial slogans we discussed are examples of spaced repetition. That little voice inside our head that says, "You're a big disappointment, Calvin," is another example of spaced repetition. The expectations of others, although frequently not verbal, are also a form of spaced repetition in that, after years and years of seeing the rest of the world quietly expect from us only mediocre results, we begin to expect the same from ourselves. We learn through the constant repetition of material into our minds. It is a continuing and subtle process. We can either exert no control over the input that we receive and continue to permit radio, TV, newspapers, and those around us to program our computer, or we can adopt our own program, which will, at the very least, help counterbalance the less desirable repetition we receive from others. It is to a very large extent a battle between positive and negative repetitions. We can rely upon the fact that the rest of the world will not provide us with too many positive repetitions. Those we must manufacture ourselves. Then we must deliberately and logically feed those repetitions into our computer. For every voice that whispers in our ear, "You're not so hot, you can't succeed, you are just average," we must manufacture our own voice which says, "You are the greatest, you are the greatest, you are the greatest." A friend of mine actually goes to the extreme of verbally canceling negative input. If, for example, he catches himself putting himself down by saying, "I'm not much of an athlete," he'll instantly respond by saying out loud, "Cancel, cancel, cancel. What I meant to say was, I've never spent much time developing my athletic abilities." When someone approaches him and says, "This is a tough business we're in," he'll smile, but say to himself under his breath, "Cancel, cancel, cancel. I can make it, I can make it, I can make it." When the world comes to our door and announces, "Joe, you're fat," or "Mary, you're forgetful," or "John, you'll never amount to much," we must, in our own way, and saying it out loud is an effective approach, cancel, cancel, cancel that input with positive input of our own. You know, it can be a lonely business, but it's our job and our ultimate responsibility to ourselves not to let the rest of the world pull us down to its level of complacency. Rather, we must be so self-sustaining and so self-motivating that ultimately we pull the world up to our level of excitement. Enough of this Mr. Nice Guy stuff. Too many people regard positive thinking as something that would cause us, after we got run over by a truck, to check and see that we didn't hurt the tires. Instead, we must bear this basic premise in mind at all times. We have absolutely nothing to apologize for. Whether or not someone likes our attitude is their problem, not ours. Whether or not someone likes our ambition is their problem, not ours. No one has the right to drag us down or hold us back. When we permit others to do that to us, we permit them to limit our potential, to limit our self-actualization as a human being. Militant positiveness is a form of discipline. It is an acquired skill, a mental state wherein we remain highly conscious of the extent to which those around us pull us down, and let them know in no uncertain terms that we won't permit it. Being positive in this context doesn't mean that we're going to be Mr. Nice Guy at all costs. It means that we can be very unnice to those whose words, actions, or attitudes threaten to deter us from the realization of our goals. Militant positiveness is not a success at all costs philosophy. It simply provides that we have a right to get angry at those people who, through their words, actions, or attitudes, will not permit us to realize our full potential. With all this in mind, let's get down to specific techniques for warding off the niops. Positive affirmations are as old as the Old Testament and as new as the young fellow talking about positive mental attitude. They're as old as Moses and as new as Muhammad Ali. Somewhere in the Bible it says, "Whatever passeth thy lips, so too shall ye be." Another way of phrasing it, I suppose, is that we better be careful of what we hope for, because we're likely to get it. When, many years ago, Muhammad Ali stood in front of the television cameras and said, "I am the greatest," everyone thought he was blowing smoke. But for more than a decade, he has been just that. There are many ways to conduct positive affirmations. One of my favorites is the Flip Wilson style. Let's try a positive affirmation in that style right now. Go ahead and stand up wherever you are. If anyone is within shouting distance of you, they're about to think you're crazy, but that's all right. We've already agreed that what they think is their problem, not yours. Now, put your left foot forward. No, your other left. That's right. Put your right hand on your hip. Lean back and shout these words. I'm looking good. I'm feeling good. I am the greatest. That wasn't loud enough. Try it again. Go ahead. So maybe you feel a little foolish. You've spent a whole lifetime being programmed with negative input. It stands to reason that receiving positive input may feel slightly out of character for a while. But go ahead and try it again anyway. This time shout much louder, make the rafters ring, cause the neighbors to call the police. Convince that fellow worker down the hall that it's just a question of time before they carry you away. Go ahead. I'm looking good. I'm feeling good. I am the greatest. Feeling better? I hope so. At the very least, you should be smiling. If not, I suggest you check your pulse for signs of life. There are other, more conventional forms of positive affirmations, no less effective. One of the more popular ways to start each day, suggested by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, is to recite these words aloud. This is the day the Lord hath made, I shall rejoice and be happy in it. A favorite of mine that I frequently repeat time and again, especially while jogging, is, I am here to be happy, to enjoy each day, and to use my abilities to the fullest. Of course, there's no requirement that we use someone else's positive affirmations. Finding a combination of words that is meaningful to us and repeating those words to ourselves several times each day is what's important. There may be a saying or a slogan that says it all as far as you're concerned. If so, that should be the positive affirmation you adopt. If nothing immediately comes to mind, then take a moment, a pad of paper, and a pencil, and write your own. Be sure that it is totally positive. Be sure that it reflects your own deep-seated belief in yourself and in your potential. Be sure that it says the one thing that you want to remember each day. Repeat the affirmation at least 3 times each day and witness its virtually magic effect at lifting your spirits. Sound silly? Sound corny? Sound unadult? There is nothing silly or corny or unadult about reaching your full potential as a human being. If we can logically accept the notion that we're constantly deluged with negative input, then it should not be difficult to accept the notion that we must provide some positive input of our own. Positive affirmations that are meaningful to you are critical weapons in your arsenal against negativism. You may choose to change the affirmations you utilize each day, perhaps as frequently as once each month. But I suggest you record an affirmation before retiring it. A year or two down the road, it may constitute that combination of words that hits your hot button and meets your needs at the time. So there we sit, moments before going to bed, watching the news of the day. Another war is reported in outer Slobovia. 10 children met a fiery death when their school bus collided with a train. The national debt is increasing. The dollar continues to decline. The Dow Jones average is down 3 points. A protest ended in a scuffle with police, and it's going to rain tomorrow. The news is over. Time for bed. Pleasant dreams. What a wonderful conglomeration of information to be feeding our subconscious mind moments before we turn off our conscious mind and go to sleep. Is it any wonder that we wake up depressed and reluctant to face the coming day? Some people jump from bed in the morning and shout, "Good morning, Lord." Other people lay in bed and say, "Good Lord, it's morning." Which are you? The canned negativism to which you submit yourself moments before going to bed can have a profound effect upon your attitudes in the morning. It can even profoundly affect the extent to which you get a good night's sleep. We owe it to ourselves to, at the very least, create a buffer between television's version of canned negativism and our own subconscious state called sleep. After the news and prior to bed, we owe it to ourselves to read a few pages of an inspiring book, to review mentally all the good things that have happened that day, or to review with our spouse all of our positive expectations for tomorrow. At the very least, we should wait a few minutes after the news and listen to a few of Johnny Carson's jokes before going to bed. Newspapers can be just as devastating to our positive perceptions. By and large, an item is considered newsworthy if it will help sell newspapers. Good news doesn't help sell newspapers. Bad news does. On the television show 60 Minutes, the producers not long ago yielded to the request that they report some good news in addition to the bad. They spent about 7 minutes reporting on a New York to London flight filled with people that didn't crash. They described each stage of the journey, including how the people looked and felt as they walked off the plane. The flight was uneventful and safe, as the vast majority of flights are. The report was concise and factual. It was also overwhelmingly boring. The fact is, the media reports bad news because it is bad news for which we are willing to pay. There have been many attempts to produce good news newspapers, good news television stations, good news radio stations, and the results have all been the same. They all folded because no one read, watched, or listened. The media provides us with the information for which we will pay. And generally speaking, at least on the level of news, we pay for catastrophe, disaster, pain, and suffering. Yet any reporter would be quick to admit that the news that winds up on our TVs, radios, and in our newspapers constitutes less than a millionth of the significant events of the day worldwide. Reported news does, however, represent a relatively fair cross-section of the trauma and disasters which are occurring around the globe. Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, we listen to all the bad news on the radio on our way to and from work. We read all the bad news in the newspaper once we get home from work, and then we watch television coverage of the same bad news before going to bed. Is it any wonder that our perception of the state of this world is distorted and depressed? The news media is like any other industry. It's a business. Its product is information. Its most saleable product is depressing information. Thus, it has become a form of canned negativism. There are those who suggest that we should isolate ourselves from all news regarding current events. I disagree with this approach. As members of a free society, we have a responsibility to remain informed. But we must at all times remember that the vehicle through which news reaches us is an industry that is paid to focus upon the more negative aspects of world and local events. We must, at the very least, provide a buffer between the canned negativism to which we are so frequently exposed and our own personal positive aspirations. The choice is ours. We can be programmed indefinitely with this canned negativism, not putting it into the proper context to which it belongs, allowing it to taint our perception of ourselves and the world in which we live, or we may recognize that the news that reaches us represents, for very basic economic reasons, the more sensational, traumatic, and negative events of the day. We should opt for the latter, secure in the knowledge that for every one piece of bad news that reaches us through the media, there are millions of positive events that occurred that day that went unreported.